Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Phyrexian Grimoire. Today I'm going to be discussing how to build a commander deck. I've gotten a couple of people asking if I would discuss this. They're relatively new getting into Magic, haven't been playing a whole lot, and I've been playing for almost 6 years, so I thought I would give my insights onto how I actually build my commander decks, and then go over the most recent commander deck that I've built, which is going to be the VV Orniter that just came out in Final Fantasy. The first talking point that I want to cover is why. Why do we want to build a commander deck? Do you want a specific color combination? Do you want a specific style of deck, that be it lands, artifact deck, dragon tribal, or just a silly deck, or specific card choice? So the first one, color combination. I really enjoy building different color combinations of similar decks. So this here is going to be red-blue spells, right? So it's going to be instants and sorceries predominantly, and then other spells take some, hold over what's going on. I've got enchantments and artifacts in here too, as you can see right here on the screen, and then some creatures. It says laid out by color, multicolored, lands, non-basic lands, and then artifacts. Or colorless cards, not necessarily artifacts. So this one is specifically blue and red. I have built blue and white, blue and green, lots of different kinds of spell decks. But you can also do like that, you get the same kind of deck, right, in spells, just with different colors. Another way you can do it is deck style. So instead of taking the color of the deck and changing that, you change the style of the deck. So this here is, red and blue spells, but you can also do specifically artifacts. Or you can do wizard tribal. And tribal is just a generic term for picking a specific creature type and then building around that. Or you can just do, it doesn't have to actually be a specific type. It can just be a silly deck with fun cards that you enjoy or found looking through a collection. Those are all, those are good equally ways of building a deck. Another choice, the one that I most often use, is going to be card choice. So picking a specific commander. I really wanted to build this VV Orniter deck. And so when I pulled it drafting Final Fantasy, I decided I was going to build it instead of buying one. When picking your specific commander, there are commanders that do plenty of different things. In the Google Doc that I have linked in the description, I have an example here. Alela Artful Provocateur is going to be for one, a white, a blue, and a black. It is a legendary creature, fairy warlock with flying, death touch, and lifelink. Not necessarily important, but they are important whenever you get to the next one. Other creatures you control with flying get +1/+0, so that it increases the power, but doesn't change the toughness. And as well as, whenever you cast an artifact or enchantment, create a 1/1 blue fairy creature token with flying. So the way you can look at this is in each of this different ways of color combination. If you're looking for specifically a white, blue, and black deck, this is a great commander for that. If you are looking for a style of deck, you could actually do quite a few different styles. Fairy Tribal is an excellent option, it being a fairy itself, making fairies, as well as giving a little boost to all of your creatures with flying, which most of the fairies in Magic have flying. You can also do artifact or enchantments as another type of deck. So whenever you cast an artifact or enchantment, you make a 1/1 blue fairy, so you can fill your deck full of artifacts to trigger that ability as many times as possible. Or you can just do it as a silly fun deck. I liked this commander. I wanted to build with all of the fun, silly blue, white, and black cards that I had, so that's what I decided to do. It's a great versatile commander. Not all commanders are like this. Some commanders are a lot more specific on what they do, which does lead to similar deck lists whenever building. But that one specifically is an easy one because it's no two people are going to have the same deck list unless they copied the deck list, because there's not 100 cards that go in the deck or 99 cards that go in the deck that are all extremely good for the deck and perfect. There's like hundreds of thousands of ways to build the deck. Or you can build around specific cards, which is another thing that I really enjoy doing, is picking a card that can't necessarily be your commander and doesn't necessarily fit into a generically good card. The example I have in the Google Doc is Soul Diviner. For a black and a blue, it is a zombie wizard that is a 2/3. Wasn't necessarily planned for both of the creatures I'm talking about to be 2/3s, but that's just how it ended up. But you can tap the creature, remove a counter from an artifact or creature, land, or planeswalker you control to draw a card. Now, if you're building a +1/+1 counter deck, this is a great way to draw a couple cards. Normally, you don't need all 1,000 +1/+1 counters that you put on all of your creatures, but it works great in decks where you are putting, for example, finality counters, which is a relatively new kind of counter that whenever the permanent that has the counter on it leaves the battlefield, you exile it instead. You can remove those counters, and then those end up back in your graveyard where you can use them again normally. So it is excellent in a deck like that, whenever you're casting cards that end up putting finality counters on themselves. So we've covered why you're building a deck, the color combination, your style of deck, if you just want to pick specific cards. And now I think the next thing to cover is how to build a deck. So the way we're going to start is talking about the tools that I use and that other people use to build decks. Lots of people use different tools. These are just the ones that I use and that a couple of my friends use as well. So EDHREC is going to be a great tool if you're just getting started. It has basically every commander that you could ever build with every deck or the percentage of cards put into those decks. So if you're building a black-white deck, it's going to recommend that you put an island into the deck. Or not an island, a plains. If you are building a deck, it's going to recommend that you put Sol Ring into the deck, which is this card right here. For 1 generic mana, you tap it to add 2 generic mana. So it's going to recommend you put those cards in the deck because it is what most people put into the deck. Now, that's not necessarily something you have to use. Some people really don't like using it because it makes a lot of people's decks feel really similar. So if you don't want to use that, another great option is to use Moxfield or Archidekt. Those are deck building websites. They let you store your deck lists so you can go back and look at them, change them without buying the cards and putting them in that deck that you've built. And it's just a good way to store the deck list that you have created. But other things you can use it for is searching for specific decks. So if you're looking to build an Alayla Artful Provocateur deck, you can look up the card name and find out how other people have built the decks. You can see what interesting cards that they have put into their decks, and then maybe put it into your deck. I use Moxfield personally. I have 400 different decks in Moxfield. I have way too many. But that's just where I store all of my deck lists for when I'm creating decks. The next thing that you can use is called Scryfall. And the way Scryfall works is it's just a database that contains basically every Magic card ever printed, legal, not legal, any of the silly fun ones that Wizards of the Coast, the creators of Magic the Gathering, have made up. So there are some cards that are not real cards, but have been printed on cardstock. So they are technically cards that if you wanted to, you could play. And that is the place where basically you can find every card ever. So that is another great resource. I don't use it too often because a lot of that is built into Moxfield. So that's just where I get it. But that's tools you can use to actually build your deck. Next, I'm going to talk about acquiring cards. Now, it seems like a mundane topic, but it is important to point out that there are different ways to acquire cards. So local game stores are going to probably be the best way to do it. You're going to support a local business rather than any big stores that may or may not deserve the business that you're providing them, but that's neither here nor there. Local game stores are probably going to be the best place to find relatively cheap cards. A lot of local game stores don't have expensive cards on hand. They have some, but it's just select cards that have been traded into the local game store. Big box stores like Walmart and Target are the other stores I was talking about. It's going to be a lot of them. They have the most recent sets. They don't have any singles. They only have packs and bundles and the pre-constructed commander decks, which I won't be talking about here because you buy them, you can edit them if you'd like, but they are just pre-constructed for you to play. They have all of those, and but they don't have singles or anything else like that. Other places you can get them are online stores. TCG Player is going to be the place that I buy most of my cards from. I'm not buying super high-end cards. They are relatively the cheapest store, but that is because they are a collection of local game stores who have put their inventory online. They are not necessarily a conglomerate with one warehouse. It is local game stores shipping their cards to you. Card Kingdom is going to be the next most expensive, in my opinion, for what you're getting. It is basically a warehouse that is near you. They have most of the cards on hand of their own. They don't normally contain cards from other sellers, and all of theirs is pretty pre-approved. Everything goes through inspections from Card Kingdom themselves and not just the local game stores, and shipped through the mail for it to get squished by the mail carrier. And then Tales of Adventure Magic, is going to be the high-end store that I would recommend. They have lots of different high-end cards from the original dual lands, that are the lands that have 2 land types that are basic land types, but they do not come into play tapped. They are very expensive cards, and used copies of them still go for upwards of $400. Copies of them that aren't even playable in any sort of tournaments at all are going to go for still hundreds of dollars, because Commander players don't have to play with tournament legal cards. So they're still expensive for that reason. But they're going to have high-end cards that you can't really find other places. You're not going to find them normally at your local game stores, and you're not going to find them as easily on TCG Player or Card Kingdom. So that's just my recommendation for a high-end store. And then the next how-to is going to be to ask for help. I mean, realistically, there are hundreds of thousands of Magic players who are willing to help whenever you're looking for specific cards for specific decks, if you're looking for recommendations on what commanders to build. There's plenty of great YouTube channels that I won't go over here. So there's just lots of people to ask for help. Now, I also can help. I'm not always the end-all be-all, obviously. I still am learning how to play Magic myself. They keep making new things, and I keep learning new rules. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is deck composition. And this is where I'm actually going to get into talking about my own deck here. So the way I'm going to start with is your lands to spells ratio. I have everything separated out here, and I have not counted them today, but I did count them yesterday. I have 11 mountains in my red-blue deck, and I have 12 blue lands. They're not all necessarily islands. The one on top here is going to be a utility land. It still enters untapped and taps for blue mana, so I have it sitting here with the islands. For all intents and purposes, it is an island. Alright, so that together is going to be 23 different lands. Now, this is a relatively low land count deck. Most people recommend 37, which I think is completely overkill. In my opinion, 37 lands means you're going to draw a hand with 4 lands in it. Now, if you have a 4-mana commander, sometimes that's what you want to see. If you build your deck in a way to where you have enough lands on your first draw 7 that you can cast your commander, everything else that you have or need for mana is going to be in your mana ramp or mana rocks, which are going to be the artifacts that you play that tap for mana on their own. In my deck here, I have 30 lands even, right? That is 7 short of the recommended 37 to 40. Now, this is a relatively inexpensive deck. A lot of the cards are going to be 1, 2, or 3 mana. So that 3 lands is going to be easy to cast, as well as the commander itself makes mana. So I can get away with running less lands. The thing that you're going to want to do is make sure that you have the lands to spell ratio that help cast all of your spells. So I have lots of 1, 2, and 3 cost spells, and the commander makes mana, like I just said. But I am easily able to cast most of the spells in my deck with just 3 lands. And if I have any extra or any mana rocks, it lets me cast more than 1 spell in a turn. So that's the way that I like to do it. I like to make sure I can cast at least the commander and then any of the mana ramp that I'm playing. If I have a hand that has only 1 land in it, I'm not going to keep that hand. Now the next thing to focus on is having payoff cards compared to just really good cards. So I have here 2 cards, both of them draw cards. This one is the One Ring. It's indestructible. Whenever it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, you gain protection from everything. That's not important to what I'm talking about at the moment, but it is important in a general game. And it has tap, put a counter on it, draw a card, or draw cards equal to the counters on it, actually. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life for each counter on it. It is a generically strong card. It is indestructible. It's very hard to get rid of without exiling the artifact itself. And it draws you cards. The more cards you have, the better. But it is not the best card draw spell in this deck, because the best card draw spell is going to be the one that works with my commander. And this one's going to be Curiosity. So whenever the enchanted creature, because it is an aura, deals damage to an opponent, not just combat damage, you draw a card. With Vivi's second ability, wherein whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you put a 1/1 counter on Vivi and it deals 1 damage to each opponent. If you have 3 opponents and you cast a non-creature spell, any non-creature spell from even the One Ring itself, Soul Ring, or even Everflowing Chalice, which costs no mana to cast if you don't put any charge counters on it, you draw 3 cards, which for every spell you're casting, basically, because there's probably 8 creatures in the deck, you're going to draw a lot of cards with the commander. Now, it is reliant on the commander, because if you don't have it, it does nothing. Wherein, if you don't have your commander, you definitely want the One Ring instead to draw cards. But that's the way that I like to do it. I like to have a set of cards that are just generically good. So I like to have Treasure Cruise is another one that I'm going to show you right here. It is for 7 and a blue, and the Delve ability, which you can exile cards from your graveyard to pay for 1 generic mana of the spell's cost. So it can actually go down to exactly 1 blue mana to draw 3 cards. It is generically good. It is great in a deck where you're casting a lot of spells, but it's also just good in a deck where your game is going to be going longer than 3 turns, which in most games they are. So it works great here. For non-card draw things, I have this card sitting on top of the red cards here, Wild Ride, for 1 red mana. It gives target creature +3/+0 and haste. The haste is not so important, the +3/+0 is. Because of Vivi's first ability, you can pay 0 and add an amount of mana of red or blue equal to Vivi's power. So whenever you cast Wild Ride targeting Vivi, you put a 1/1 counter on it just for casting the card. Even if it doesn't resolve, you still get the 1/1 counter. And you deal 1 damage to each opponent, and then you get an additional +3/+0. So Vivi's power has gone from 0 to 4 for 1 red mana, which, whenever you activate the first ability, you've gained 4 mana. So for Vivi's 3 mana, that 1 mana, it's essentially free if you did it all on the same turn. And Wild Ride is especially good because of its Harmonize ability. Harmonize is a new keyword where whenever you may cast a spell from your graveyard for its Harmonize cost, which it is 4 and a red, but you also may tap a creature you control to reduce the cost of this spell by X, where X is the power. So if you've already cast 1 Wild Ride, Vivi's power is 4. If you tap Vivi and recast Wild Ride again, now for another red mana, you've increased Vivi's power by another 4. So Vivi's power is now 8, and you could still activate the mana ability of Vivi because it doesn't require tapping to activate. So it is a great card in this deck. It is not great in every deck. A red card that would be great in every deck, or most decks, is going to be Underworld Breach. For 1 in a red, you give all of the cards in your graveyard escape, or all of the spells in your graveyard escape, where you can pay the mana cost of that spell and exile 3 other cards from your graveyard to replay the spell from your graveyard. It does not exile it if it goes back to the graveyard, so if you recast an instant, it goes back to your graveyard, and you can do it again if you'd like. So, a generically good red card. You get to reuse all the stuff in your graveyard. It's great. So, payoff cards to just good cards, you're going to want to have more generically good cards than payoff cards, because you're not always going to have your commander in play. And if you only have cards that are good with your commander in play, you're going to have a lot of bad cards in your hand if your commander is not in play, which if you're playing a commander that is 4 or more mana, it's going to be on average turn 4 that you get it out. If you have built your deck in a way in which you can cast 1 mana ramp spells or 2 mana ramp spells, which are going to be spells that give you additional mana, whether that's in the form of lands or artifacts, you can get it out on turn 3 or 2, but it's not always going to be in play. So if you have, I would rather have an opening hand with a card like Underworld Breach rather than Wild Ride in that hand, because Underworld Breach is going to be good more often than Wild Ride. But if I have my commander out, I want to see Wild Ride every time I draw a card off the top of my library, because it's a very good card. Now, having talked about mana ramp and card draw, those are the next things you're going to want to focus on. There is a lot of card draw in this deck specifically, because you're wanting to draw through your deck and play through it as fast as possible. Fairly certain at least 30% of the cards in this deck say draw a card, or they can let you play spells that say draw a card, or find spells that draw you cards. You want to draw as many cards in this deck as you can, because that is the goal of the deck. There is also a lot of ramp spells, because they work specifically with the commander as artifacts in this blue-red color combination, but that is not always going to be the case. If you're playing a green deck, you're going to have a lot of land ramp spells, which if you're playing a commander that has anything to do with lands, it's great. But even just playing a green deck, you're going to want to have a lot of land ramp spells, because it's harder to get rid of lands, and in the game of Commander, normally socially unacceptable to remove other people's lands. There are cards that do it. They are something we'll talk about here in a little bit, but they are going to be the better option normally for your ramp. You want to have quite a bit of ramp, quite a bit of card draw, and then you want to have maybe 10% of your deck be ways to win the game, or combinations of cards that basically win the game. For example, Brain Freeze, right here, and Underworld Breach are going to be cards that basically win the game when played together. Brain Freeze lets you have target player mill 3 cards, and it has the keyword Storm. So for each time you've cast a spell before this one, you copy this spell. So if you just cast Brain Freeze without casting anything else, you have somebody mill 3 cards. If you have Underworld Breach out, those 3 cards are enough cards to recast Brain Freeze from your graveyard. And you get a second copy of it whenever you do it the second time. So you end up with 6 cards in your graveyard. And then 9 cards in your graveyard, and so on. So they effectively let you win the game by being able to remove all of the cards from either your library or everyone else's library, depending on how low the library counts are. And then you can play a card like this one here, Laboratory Maniac, which says if you draw a card while your library has no cards in it, instead of losing the game, you win the game. Which is an excellent win condition for this deck, but it's not the only one. But it is one that works well with the Underworld Breach and Brain Freeze combination. The other thing that this deck wants to do is either just kill by using the commander's ability to deal everybody at least 40 damage, since it is each opponent. It is 40 spells you end up having to cast. With an Underworld Breach, that's not as hard, And with other sources of damage, it's also still not as hard. The other thing that this deck can do is a combo like Dual Caster Mage, which is a card with flash. Whenever Dual Caster Mage enters the battlefield, copy target instant or sorcery spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. So that works well with Electro Duplicate. So if you cast Electro Duplicate with any target, you create a token that's a copy of target creature that you control. Except it has haste, and at the beginning of your end step, you sacrifice this token. Right? With that spell still on the stack, you cast Dual Caster Mage targeting that spell. It makes a copy of the Electro Duplicate, which you choose the new target of Dual Caster Mage. That new Dual Caster Mage that it makes a token copy of will make a new copy of the original Electro Duplicate spell. And you do this for as many times as you need until your opponents have no life total after you attack them, because all of the tokens have haste. That is another way that it can win. It can also do the same combo in blue. I'm going to go over it really quick. It's not as important. Narumeha Master Wizard. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you copy target instant or sorcery spell you control. You choose new targets for the copy. Other wizards you control get +1/+1. That's not important. Whenever you're casting, let's see here, Irenicus's Vile Duplication. So it's going to be the same combo, wherein you cast Irenicus's Vile Duplication to create a token that's a copy of target creature you control, except that creature is not legendary. If it is legendary, you use Narumeha Master Wizard to make a copy of Irenicus's Vile Duplication. That next copy of Irenicus's Vile Duplication copies the Narumeha, and you end up with a infinite amount, or effectively infinite, you do have to choose a number, of infinitely sized wizards, because Narumeha is a legendary creature. The spell that we choose makes her not legendary, and then all of the wizards you control get +1/+1 for each wizard you control. So if you have something that gives them trample and haste, like this card here, Frostcliff Siege, you can give trample and haste to all of your creatures. You have an infinitely sized board of infinitely sized creatures, and you can attack right away. Or, because these ones don't go away at the end step, you can pass the turn and come back to your own turn and attack for, the whole table. That does leave room for other people to respond to what you're doing, or interact with what you're doing by casting a spell that removes all the creatures. But that is a way that this deck can win. There is another win condition in this deck. I'm not going to go over it, but that is just the way that I build my decks. There is a lot of generically good cards. There is cards like Commandeer, which let you gain control of target spell and choose new targets for the copy. And you can exile 2 blue cards from your hand rather than pay the spell's mana cost. It is an excellent way to protect your own combos, or to just gain control of problem cards. If somebody else casts the One Ring, it is a non-creature spell, so you can gain control of it with Commandeer. It is just a good card. It's generically good. It's not an expensive card by any means, but it does give you the spell instead of just countering the spell. Now, the next thing that I'm going to go over is the Rule 0 conversation that you have in Commander. In 60 card formats, you don't have this. So you don't get to have a here's what we accept in this playgroup, or here's what we're going to accept whenever we play conversation, because you just play to the rules of the game. Now, in Commander, you have Rule 0, where if somebody doesn't want to play against Vivi Orniter because they don't like infinite combos, they don't like cards like the One Ring or cards like Commandeer, they don't like stuff like that. You have to talk to your playgroup, and if they don't like that, you normally just don't pick the deck, or maybe you convince them that, your deck is not exactly what they're thinking it's going to be. Maybe you've built a fun version of the deck that they're not necessarily ready for, and you want to just see if they could play it. That is what the Rule 0 conversation is. It is the Rule 0 being that you have a conversation with all the players you're playing with, and you see what is acceptable at the table you're playing at. So one thing you talk about is going to be the brackets of your cards. So The way that they've changed the system for defining how strong your deck is with brackets. So bracket 1 is going to be a pile of cards you put together with no rhyme or reason. They just all end up fitting into a color, and it's easy to just put cards into a deck, and this is your bracket 1 deck. Now, it might be a pretty good deck, but as long as it's just cards you kind of slam together without any rhyme or reason, it's going to be considered a bracket 1 deck. Bracket 2 deck is going to be pre-constructed decks. So it's going to be any of the decks that Wizards of the Coast sells, completed as is with all of the stuff that they put into it. It's going to generally not have any cards that are considered game changers, which is going to be cards like the One Ring, which are considered exceedingly strong and put on the Game Changers list. I will have a link to the Game Changers list in the description, as well as the Google Doc that I'm using to keep my notes on. As well as I'll leave links to all of the websites that I talked about earlier. But the third bracket is going to be an upgraded precon, is what it's considered. So it is an upgraded version of a pre-constructed deck. It is going to have cards that are game changers. You can have up to 3 of them. After 3, you run into having too many and into having a bracket 4 deck. So anything more than 3 puts you into bracket 4 automatically. Having infinite combos that are assemblable by turn 4 or earlier, I think is what it is, makes you not a bracket 3 deck anymore. It is going to be a bracket 4 deck. And then also your mindset is another thing that they also consider. Bracket 4 considers how you're trying to play. If you're trying to win and that's what your goal is, rather than just to have fun. Now, you might have fun winning, but if your goal is to win, you're playing a bracket 4 deck. Now, at bracket 4, like I said, 4 game changers, infinite combos that are assemblable by turn 4 and earlier are going to be bracket 4, whereas bracket 5 is going to be competitive EDH, or Elder Dragon Highlander, which is what Commander is, or CEDH as it's commonly known as. It's going to be the highest power decks that everybody's going to be playing. The people who are playing bracket 5 decks are trying to win, and they are exclusively trying to win. Having fun is not as important as the winning. So you're going to end up finding cards that are not fun, rather than just generically good. So cards like Drannith Magistrate for 1 and a white. Your opponents can't cast spells from anywhere except their hand. Because the command zone is not your hand, you don't start with it in your hand, you cannot cast your commanders. In anything under bracket 4 and 5, it is considered unacceptable to play this card because it is not fun. No one else is playing Commander if you cast this card on turn 1 or 2. So that is one of the things that puts you up into bracket 4 and 5 automatically without even having any sort of game changers besides this being a game changer itself. If you put this into a white deck and your goal is to make sure that other people are playing less Magic than you, and that you are trying to win over having fun or letting everyone have fun, then it is going to be a bracket 4 or 5 deck depending on how strong your deck is. Now, the other thing to talk about with Rule 0 is going to be banned cards. There are cards that are banned in Commander. Cards like Time Walk or Black Lotus, which are just very, very strong cards, 2 of the strongest cards ever printed. Time Walk is for 1 and a blue. You take an extra turn. Exceedingly strong card. Most extra turn spells are 5 mana nowadays. There are some that have the same mana cost of 2, but are extremely restrictive. Most of them make you lose the game at the end of the new turn. There are 3 mana ones that don't let you have an untap step. So you get to take an extra turn, you effectively get an extra combat and to draw an extra card. Unless you have other ways of untapping your permanents. So Time Walk is going to be the strongest extra turn spell ever printed. Black Lotus is a 0 mana card. You tap, sacrifice that Black Lotus, and add 3 mana of any one color. Another exceedingly strong card. They are banned for a reason in Commander, although I don't think they should be, but that's a topic for a different day. But you can play banned cards because this is not a tournament format. So if you sit down with your playgroup and you want to play a card like Lutri the Spell Chaser, right? This is for 1 generic mana, a hybrid blue-red mana, and another hybrid blue-red mana, which you can use it to, you can cast a spell for either blue or red. It is a blue-red card for the purposes of looking at the color identity. It has Companion. Each non-land card in your deck has a different name. So that's going to be every commander deck effectively. There are some decks that you do have cards of different name, or of the same name. There are cards that let you play multiple copies of them, so you don't actually get to play this card. But most blue-red decks are going to be available to play this as a companion, which means you get to have it as your 101st card, which is why it's banned. Because every blue-red deck would play this card. It has other text. It is just like Narumeha, Master Wizard. It has Flash. Whenever it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, you copy target instant or sorcery spell you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. It doesn't actually go and combo with any of the cards that I mentioned earlier because of that if you cast it clause. But it is still a free 101st card if you could play it. But it is a banned card. Now, I have it sitting with this deck because it works well with the deck. And I ask other people if I can play the card in this deck. Sometimes people don't want to, which is perfectly fine. And some people want to see what it can do, because no one gets to really play with banned cards. I mean, they're banned in Commander, so you don't end up playing them in most 60-card formats, because they're just not good there, especially this one, where in a 60-card format, you can have multiple cards with the same name. And then people just want to see what it does. Sometimes people don't want to play against it because they see it is a banned card and it is not going to be legal for anyone to play normally, so they don't like seeing it. So that is perfectly fine. I keep it with this deck because I can talk to the playgroup that I'm playing with and ask if it's okay if I play the card. Another thing that you can also do is play with the Unfinity cards. They're going to be what now have a little silver acorn down in the middle of the, right down here. This one doesn't. These are all silver bordered. So they're a shiny silver border. They are not legal for play in anything except for the draft formats that they were printed in. So you normally can't play these. A lot of them have silly, wacky mechanics. Some of them would be perfectly fine to play. Like this one, Blast from the Past, for 2 and a red. It deals 2 damage to any target. It has the keywords Madness, Cycling, Kicker, Flashback, and Buyback. I won't go over what all of those do because they are not really important. But because it has all of those keywords, it is a silly, wacky card that sometimes people are acceptable. They accept playing with it because it is not super strong. It's not the best card ever printed that I'm putting into my commander deck. But it is not a legal card. You just have to talk to who you're playing with and see exactly what they're okay with playing. Another thing in the Rule Zero conversation is cards that just don't work in Commander. So the example I have here is Yorion the Sky Nomad. It's going to be another card with Companion. It's a weird mechanic from Ikoria. They have never redone it before. It is considered one of the strongest things that they've ever done because it gives you an extra card in your deck. So for 3, a white or a blue hybrid and another white and blue hybrid, you get a legendary Bird Serpent. With Companion, your starting deck contains at least 20 more than the minimum deck size. In Commander, the minimum deck size is 100. The maximum deck size is also 100. So you can't have 20 more than the minimum because the maximum and minimum are the same. It doesn't necessarily work in Commander. That being said, if you wanted to build a 120 card Commander deck, most playgroups would probably let you play this as your companion because it is not necessarily the end-all be-all card. It is not amazing. The other ability it has is whenever it enters the battlefield, you may exile any number of non-land permanents you own and control. Return those to the battlefield under your control at the beginning of the next end step. So it lets you mass blank your whole board for the cards that you own and control, which is important. Not important for what we're discussing, but it is important for playing the card. And it is a card that doesn't work in Commander. Now, I've played a Yorion companion deck because it is something that people think is fun to do. There is a card called Battle of Wits that a lot of people really like to rule 0 in Commander. It says for a 3, a blue and a blue, it is a 5-mana enchantment. If you have more than 200 cards in your library at the beginning of your next upkeep, you win the game. Now, in regular Commander, you could never achieve that. You could never have 200 cards in your library. For this to work, you would have to have a 250-ish card deck and need to find your Battle of Wits within a certain amount of time before you run out of cards in your deck. Or go under 200, I guess. It doesn't really work. Some people allow it, though, because it is a fun card. It is silly. It's not really a game-breaking card. There are a lot of cards that win the game just by paying 5 mana. It's not super hard. So it is just one of the ways that you can have a conversation with the people you're playing with and see if they are okay with playing against cards like that. So that is how I generically would build a deck. It is going through why I want to build the deck, how to build the deck, so you got to acquire cards, your composition of the deck, which I can touch on more just right now. The composition of this deck is going to be about equal in blue and red cards. If you can see this here, they're about equal just because these are the cards that I had that were going to go well in the deck. It ended up being pretty equal. There's technically more blue cards, which is why I have 12 blue lands and only 11 red lands, as well as the 7 lands that I would consider either blue or red. There's 5 lands that I would consider blue or red. It's going to be cards like River Pyreverge, which tap for blue and red, or cards like this one here is Evolving Wilds, wherein you can search your library for a basic land of any type, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. And then I have 2 colorless lands, one that gives me an infinite hand size, and one that gives me something to do with the mana that Vivi makes if I don't necessarily have something to do with it already. And then I have only 2 multicolor cards, because I found that when playing this deck, the multicolor cards that I do have are not as good as the monocolored cards. Monocolored cards are generically normally stronger because for some reason, Wizards of the Coast has decided that multicolored cards aren't as good, or in the nature of being multicolored makes them better, which is not true. It's something that they used to do a lot more. Now it has kind of changed, wherein they are relatively similar in power level, but there is still a great difference in the power level of a card like Ponder, or Ideas Unbound is probably a better example for this deck, wherein you can draw 3 cards and at the end of your turn discard 3 cards for only 2 blue mana, compared to a card like Frostcliff Siege, wherein you choose either Jeskai or Temur. If you choose Jeskai, whenever one or more creatures deal combat damage to a player, you draw a card. You only ever draw 1 card from this, and it's only whenever you deal combat damage, or creatures you control get +1/+0 and have trample and haste. For 3 mana of 2 different colors, rather than just 2 mana. They are similar cards in that one of them draws cards and the other one also draws cards. One of them is technically more flexible in what it does. So that's kind of how I build my decks. So I go with generically good card draw effects, ramp effects, cards that work with the commander. So you're going to want approximately 30% of cards that work with your commander, or maybe more like 20%. So you're looking at like 19 or 20 because your commander doesn't necessarily count. You're going to want to have about 10 ramp spells, give or take. You don't necessarily need exactly 10. You don't need less than 10 or more than 10. 10 is just the generic number that I go for. Lots of card draw is great in a deck. The more cards you have, generally, the better you're going to do in a game. A little off topic, but that's kind of how I build the decks rather than just talking about the basics. I can go more in depth on another deck that I have in a future time. I am still building it, so I can go more in depth on that deck. Or I can go less in depth and talk more about the reason I build my decks. So For this one, the reason was I wanted to build Vivi. I opened it in my pre-release, so I did. But there are commanders that I want to build that either just haven't had enough support printed for them, or archetypes that I want to build, which is going to be, artifacts, lands, that kind of stuff, the archetype of the deck, that haven't had a commander printed for them yet that works great. So, or that I don't necessarily like. So, I want to have decks that I like specifically playing. This one is one of those. I don't necessarily like just having good decks. This is a great deck, but it is not necessarily just built because it was a great deck. That's kind of all I wanted to talk about today. This is going to be kind of an ongoing series, is me talking about how I like to build my decks, how I go about building my decks, and then other ways to build decks besides just this one. I had the card, and I pulled it, and I wanted to build it. That's going to be all from me today. This is going to be it for Rexian Grimoire, and I will see you next time.